Whispering Pines Asylum was the kind of place that made you second-guess your decisions, but the money they were offering was too good to pass up. I'd been between jobs for a while, scraping by on odd gigs, so when the state contacted me for this survey, I jumped at the chance. The job was simple: explore the asylum, document its current state, and report back. They didn't tell me why, and I didn't ask. The asylum had been abandoned for decades, left to decay in the middle of a dense forest, miles away from civilization. The last people who set foot inside had done so years ago, and since then, it had become the stuff of local legends. But money was money, and I wasn't going to let a few ghost stories get in the way of a hefty paycheck. When I arrived at the small office where I was to pick up the keys and the necessary documents, the woman behind the desk handed me an old, weathered envelope along with a nervous smile. "These are the rules," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Make sure you follow them." I frowned, taking the envelope. "Rules?" She nodded, her eyes flicking to the floor. "They're unusual, but they're important. If you want to make it out of there, you'll follow them exactly." Curiosity piqued, I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of yellowed paper. The handwriting was neat but old-fashioned, like it had been written decades ago. The rules were listed in order, each one more bizarre than the last. Do not enter the asylum after dark. If you are inside when the sun sets, you must remain in the building until sunrise. If you hear a patient scream, do not move for 10 seconds. No matter what, stay perfectly still. Do not look directly into the mirrors after midnight. If you must enter a room with a mirror, keep your eyes on the floor. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. Continue walking, and do not stop until you reach another room. The basement is off limits. Do not, under any circumstances, go down the stairs. If you find yourself in the basement, leave immediately. If you encounter someone who shouldn't be there, do not engage with them. Leave the room and close the door behind you. If the lights go out, do not try to fix them. Wait for them to come back on their own. If you feel someone watching you, leave the building immediately. Do not return until the next day. I stared at the list, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Are these serious?" I asked, looking up at the woman. Her expression was grave. "Dead serious. People who didn't follow the rules didn't come back." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it all as some elaborate prank, but the look in her eyes told me she believed every word. I folded the paper and stuffed it into my pocket, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. With the keys in hand, I drove out to Whispering Pines Asylum, the sun already sinking low in the sky. The building loomed ahead, a massive structure of crumbling brick and shattered windows. The iron gates were rusted, hanging open as if they hadn't been touched in years. I parked my truck and grabbed my gear, hesitating only a moment before heading toward the entrance. The front doors were heavy, and it took some effort to push them open. Inside, the smell hit me first, musty and stale, mixed with something metallic. The lobby was a ruin, the floor littered with debris, the walls stained with water damage. Old furniture was scattered about, broken and rotting, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. I switched on my flashlight and began my survey. The hallways were long and narrow, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and rusted metal sconces. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creak of the floorboards under my boots and the distant drip of water somewhere deeper in the building. I'd been in plenty of abandoned places before, but this one felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, like the building itself was alive and watching me. I tried to focus on the job, taking photos and noting the structural damage, but the rules lingered in the back of my mind, each one a nagging reminder that something was very wrong here. I started with the ground floor, moving from room to room, each one more decrepit than the last. Most of the rooms were empty, their contents long since looted or decayed beyond recognition. But a few still held remnants of the asylum's past: rusted bed frames, broken wheelchairs, and scattered medical instruments that looked more like torture devices than tools of healing. As I moved through the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, There was nothing there. My nerves were on edge, the oppressive silence pressing in on me from all sides. On the second floor, I found the patient rooms. The doors were heavy, each one with a small barred window. Most were open, revealing empty, decaying cells, but a few were still closed. The locks rusted shut. I tried not to think about what might be behind those doors as I moved down the hallway. That's when I heard it. A faint sound like shuffling footsteps coming from somewhere behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and remembered the rule. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to see who or what was there, but I forced myself to keep walking, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and I quickened my pace, not daring to look back. Finally, I reached the end of the hallway and ducked into a room, slamming the door behind me. The footsteps stopped, and I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. The room was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of my flashlight. As I scanned the room, my beam caught a large mirror on the wall. My heart skipped a beat as I remembered the third rule. Do not look directly into the mirrors after midnight. I checked my watch, 11:45 p.m. I was safe for now, but the realization that midnight was approaching filled me with a new sense of urgency. I needed to finish my survey and get out of here before the rules became even more dangerous. As I made my way to the third floor, the air grew colder, and the smell of decay intensified. The walls were covered in strange markings, scratches that looked almost like they'd been made by claws. The graffiti grew more disturbing, desperate pleas for help mixed with crude symbols that I couldn't decipher. And then there were the names, dozens of them, scratched into the walls with what looked like fingernails. In one of the larger rooms, I found what must have been the asylum's operating theater. The walls were lined with glass-fronted cabinets filled with dusty jars and surgical instruments. In the center of the room was a large metal table, and on it lay a figure covered with a stained white sheet. The rule echoed in my mind. If you encounter someone who shouldn't be there, do not engage with them. I should have left, should have turned around and walked out of the room without looking back, but something compelled me to approach the table, to see what was underneath the sheet. My hands trembled as I reached out and grabbed the edge of the fabric. Before I could pull it back, a low guttural moan filled the room, and the sheet began to move, as if something underneath was struggling to get free. I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight, and the beam flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to find the flashlight, the moaning growing louder, more desperate. The rules flashed through my mind, but they seemed jumbled now, unclear. I knew I was breaking them, but I couldn't stop myself. Finally, my fingers closed around the flashlight, and I flicked it back on. The beam illuminated the figure on the table, but the sheet was now lying flat, the moaning silenced. The room was still, the only sound my ragged breathing. I backed out of the room, my heart racing, and made my way back to the main hallway. The floorboards creaked under my boots, and I was hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in the shadows. As I approached the stairs, I heard a scream, high-pitched and filled with terror, echoing through the empty halls. The rule came to me in an instant. If you hear a patient scream, do not move for 10 seconds. I froze, counting in my head, the scream reverberating through the building. The 10 seconds felt like an eternity, but when I finally reached the end, the scream stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I hurried down the stairs, the rules blending together in my mind, a chaotic mix of warnings and threats. The urge to flee was overwhelming, but I knew I had to remain calm, had to finish the job if I wanted to get paid. But there was one rule I had to follow above all else. If you feel someone watching you, leave the building immediately. As I reached the lobby, that feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. It was as if 1,000 eyes were on me, observing my every move. I didn't wait to find out if it was real or imagined. I bolted for the door, pushing it open and stumbling out into the cold night air. The rain had stopped, and the moonlight bathed the asylum in a ghostly glow. I didn't look back as I ran to my truck, fumbling with the keys as I scrambled to unlock the door. Once inside, I slammed the door shut my hands shaking as I started the engine. As I drove away from Whispering Pines, the rules kept playing over and over in my mind. They were more than just guidelines. They were a lifeline, a way to survive the horrors that lurked within the asylum's decaying walls. I never found out what the state needed the survey for, and I never asked. The money was good, but it came with a price, one I wasn't sure was worth paying. Whispering Pines Asylum was a place of nightmares, a place where the rules kept you alive, but only just. And even now, I can't shake the feeling that something from that place followed me home, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to break the rules once more.